hymn, Faith of Our Fathers. That was written by one Frederick Faber in 1849 in England. That hymn celebrates the steadfast faith exemplified by people in England who had faced sectarian violence, persecution. Today is a day we celebrate the faith of the people because of whom today we gather here. Because of whom we have this beautiful church in this most scenic part of our city. Let us celebrate their faith and their lives. Just imagine the number of people who had got together to begin this church. It began with just a handful of people who had arrived here from England. It so happened that there was atrocity in this state, province as it was called, the kingdom of Ahoms, by the Burmese. And the Burmese couldn't contain them. The Ahom rulers could not contain the Burmese, and therefore they had to seek help from the East India Company in Calcutta. So the British were here, the East India Company got in here. By 1826, they got hold of this place, and with that began the advent of British administrators, the East India Company administrators to be more precise. And gradually there was this need for priests. And therefore there was this man called Robert Bland who was appointed the first chaplain of Assam. He landed here on the bank of the Brahmaputra, sailing from Calcutta. It must have taken him weeks, if not a month. Obviously, there were no roads, no railways those days. And with him were a small band of people. They are the ones who began this church. If it wasn't for their faith, if it wasn't for their vision, today we would not be celebrating this day. We thank God and thank God for their lives. It was just a handful of people who had got together, raised funds, contributed themselves, and built a church which was remarkably big and completed in remarkably short time. 9th of May 1844, 26th of October, today is 26th of October, 26th of October 1845, there was a church already standing here, ready to be used for divine service. And the first divine service was indeed held in Christ Church on 26th of October 1845. The church was consecrated by the Bishop of Calcutta, Daniel Wilson, in 1850, 23rd of August. Now, there was a petition to consecrate the church, and the number of people who had put in their signature was 6. So from that we can surmise that the congregation must have been rather small. However, they built a church which was 93 feet long, 49 feet wide, much larger than this church that we have today. Today, this church measures, in the nave of this church measures 48 feet, and that was 93 wall to wall. Did they need such a huge building, stone masonry, imposing building? I'm sure they did not need it, but then they had vision, they had faith. One day there would be a need for such a big building. We celebrate their lives, we celebrate their vision, we celebrate their faith. And that example of faith continued through these 175 years. Although that building was stone masonry work and large one, it was struck by an earthquake within 9 years of its erection in 1854. And the building was damaged so badly that a new building had to be rebuilt. Today we would struggle to build a church, even if you have the land, because of the cost, because of the funds that would be required. So we can imagine how hard those handful of people must have worked to raise funds and rebuild the church. 1854, it did take some time for them to get the money and build it, so they completed it by 1861. So the building was ready for services by that year. Now, that was not the end of the story of the Christchurch building falling. That building, whose photograph we have, you would see it in the souvenir to be released today. It's in the frame picture, is inside a church building. Now, that church building was also damaged beyond repair in 1897. Earthquake, the great earthquake of 1897 destroyed that church too. But people did not give up. People who believe in the Lord, people who knew God, did not give up. They made all their efforts and they built another church. So that was smaller and much simpler. But they did build a church building. They did not give up. And most of them would have been expatriates. They shouldn't have much stake in this place. One day they will pack up. Independence movement had already begun. The life was not a bed of roses for the foreigners ruling this country. And yet, they did something for tomorrow, for the generation to follow them. Let us celebrate their lives today. We must celebrate the lives of those people who continue to worship in the church in spite of not having a full-time priest. Robert Bland was the first proper full-time chaplain in this place. However, he had to quit on health grounds in 1862 or 63. His successor lasted just 7 months and he was invalidated. Health ground. Now, from that time on, for over a century, there were no full-time priests posted in this church. One of the reasons must have been that the number of people who worshipped in this church would have been very small. By the time Upper Assam had become more important with tea, with coal, and later oil. So all the Europeans and who could have been members of the church were in Upper Assam, and therefore there were always full-time chaplains in Dibrugarh and Tezpur. Not Tezpur, not because of coal or oil, but because of tea. And Shillong became more important than Guwahati after the 1870s, when the seat of administration of the Assam province shifted to Shillong, probably from Cherrapunji. Now, that shows possible reason as to why this church was practically abandoned. Of course, it was not fully abandoned because chaplains from Shillong used to come here from time to time. We have a long list of those chaplains. And that's in the souvenir. When the souvenir comes to your hand, you'll be able to see it. And the chaplains from Dibrugarh and Tezpur
in after 1920s, you have Father Wild's name very frequently featuring. He used to come and take services here. But for those people, and the few people who worshipped in this church, probably the church would have been wound up. And particularly in the members of the church being mostly the Britishers, in 1947 there would have been a huge drop even in, I don't know whether I can use the word huge, but even the few people who used to worship here would have been fewer in 1947. There would have been only a handful of families. We know about Ingti family, Lawrence Ingti. Maya Baido has written about it. Mrs. Maya John has written about it in the souvenir. And then there were some people from the steamer company, and there were some people from the railways, some people from across the country, some Anglo-Indians. In spite of there being no regular priests, they continued to hold services, and that's how they managed to keep the church going. A turning point came in the history of this church in 1972, after the inauguration of Church of North India in 1970. Bishop Pradhan, D.D. Pradhan, he posted a full-time presbyter in charge, Reverend Churchill Lingdo. Now he mobilized the people scattered across Guwahati, raised funds, built this parsonage that we have today. He planted trees, coconut trees. I personally can't identify which ones are from those days, because we planted some coconut trees in 1994 when we were celebrating the 150 years of this church. Even those coconuts are tall now. We have among us senior members like Ruth Gomes and Vincent Gomes. They may be able to identify those trees. The fact is that Reverend Churchill Lingdo revived, if I may use the word, this church. And then onwards, mostly we have been having resident presbyters here with small breaks, during which again we depended on visiting priests. Let us remember those people, thank God for those people, and let us be inspired by their inspiration, by their example. Let us build on what they had already built. Let us be faithful. We are celebrating God's faithfulness to His people through 175 years. Let us reflect on our own faithfulness. This is a good occasion to do that. So if I have not given many dates from the history of this church, that's because I was trying to avoid that, and most of the dates would be in the piece that I have written in the souvenir. Thank you very much.